The floor is defined as the lower surface of a room on which one may walk. But is that it? For me, the floor is so much more than that. It's possibility, it's opportunity, it's how we move. We can't fly, so we need the floor. The simple thing that often gets neglected is the foundation of movement. It's where the roots of our agriculture lies. It holds the bricks that keep us safe. And if respected, the floor will respect you.
If you couldn't tell from the intro, I really like the floor. My personal practice that I'm currently developing as a contemporary dancer has a lot to do with the floor and being grounded, finding ways in, out, as well as through the floor with efficiency and ease of movement. I find fascinating for me as a dancer. Before coming to LCDS, I hated the floor. You would never see me on my knees or laying down. Although since coming here and finding ways in and out, I can confidently say lessons like ground-based movement, floor work, gravity mechanics are my favorite, and I can take elements from them into my own personal practice. That's great and all, but what does the floor have to do with a martial art like capoeira and one of the oldest dance styles around? In order to appreciate the forms, we must first appreciate the context behind them. Context, please. The official start of capoeira is a tricky timeline. The little documentation that there was of the slavery in Brazil was destroyed and burned because of orders from Rui Barbosa, who was the country's Minister of Finance, in 1890. Over time, facts from this period may have been lost or distorted, as much of history is recorded from the perspective of dominant groups. Despite this, capoeira has survived within Brazilian culture, kept alive by those who have dedicated themselves to the practice. The history of capoeira is very closely connected to the history of African slaves into Brazil. When Europeans first came to Brazil, they needed cheap labor in order to harvest and exploit the land. Although, when they realized the indigenous people couldn't handle what they were being subjected to, the colonizers brought over Africans on ships. Capoeiristas disguised the practice as a game when plantation owners were around, tricking them into believing they were simply playing, when in fact, they were training. And once capoeira became a part of the slaves' lives, it was practiced on the plantation, although those who were discovered training were often subjected to torture. The berimbau, a single-stringed instrument with a gourd as a resonance chamber, was used to provide rhythm to the movements and to warn other slaves of the arrival of an overseer. The music also helped transform capoeira's image into that which is more like a dance as opposed to a fight. Capoeira gradually shifted from a tool for self-defense and a way of preserving memories of past cultures to a form of urban survival for enslaved people who were abandoned after the abolition of slavery. Capoeira was outlawed in 1890. However, around 40 years later, Maestre Bimba and Maestre Pastina systemized the practice and transformed it from black criminal activity into a recognized expression of Brazilian culture. Now it's time to take a look at jazz.
When I think about vernacular jazz and the floor, the first word that comes to mind is grounded. Unlike many Western codified dance forms, vernacular jazz does not strive to escape the floor, but instead actively works with it. The relationship between the body and the ground is rhythmic, intentional, and heavy, yet still light on the feet like capoeira. There is a constant sense of weight dropping into the feet as if the dancer is listening to the earth as much as the music. To understand why vernacular jazz is so grounded, it's essential to look at where it comes from. Jazz dance originates from African and African American dance traditions, particularly those developed by enslaved Africans in the United States. These traditions include work songs, ring shouts, and social dances that were deeply connected to rhythm as well as the community. Because drums were often banned by slave owners, the body itself became the primary source of percussion. Kariamu Welsh Asante describes African dance as a practice of stepping inside rhythms, meaning that the dancer does not simply move on the music, but embodies and generates rhythm from within the body. This idea feels central to vernacular jazz, and what Drina, our lecturer, was trying to instill in us. Rather than aiming for shapes and fixed counts, the movement is driven by internal rhythm, musicality, as well as a physical sensation. One of the most recognizable features of vernacular jazz is the bent posture. The knees and pelvis are relaxed, the torso often leans slightly forward, with the weight placed over the balls of the feet. Drina refers to this as the African stomp position. In my own body, I found this posture quite different from things I'd done before, like ballet, although it did remind me of certain groove styles like hip-hop, that low, grounded nature. Instead of lifting up and away from the floor like we would in conventional Western styles, I felt myself dropping down into my feet. I felt there's more a sense of readiness, like the body is always prepared to respond. The bent posture in jazz is not just stylistic, it's also functional. In many African dance traditions, an upright rigid posture is seen as disconnected from the earth, whereas bending the knees allows the dancer to absorb rhythm and maintain a strong relationship to the ground. Karimu Welsh Asante suggests that African-derived dance forms value polycentrism, where different parts of the body move independently while staying rooted through the legs and feet. The bent knees act as a kind of shock absorber, which allows complex rhythms to travel through the body. This grounded posture also reflects the social and political conditions from which jazz emerged. Vernacular jazz developed in black communities as a form of self-expression, resistance, survival, as well as joy. The dance was not created for elite stages or institutions, but in social spaces like streets, clubs, ballrooms, and communities. Being close to the floor reflected lived experience rather than idealized form. In contrast to Western dance forms like ballet, which prioritize an illusion of effortlessness, vernacular jazz embraces the ground. In ballet, the dancer is often taught to pull up. But in jazz, if the knees are straight, as Drina says, you appear dead. Without bend, there is no groove, there is no relationship to the music, and there is no life. For me, this has shifted how I understand technique. Technique in vernacular jazz is not about achieving this perfect line, but about cultivating a physical conversation with the floor and those around you, as it's derived from social dance. The ground is where the rhythm lives. The dancer does not escape it, they return to it again and again through bent knees, weighted steps, as well as that forward-leaning posture, the African stomp. The dancer becomes a moving instrument, playing the floor as much as the music. In this sense, being grounded in vernacular jazz is not just a physical choice, but a philosophical one. It's about remembering where the floor comes from, honoring its African roots, and acknowledging a culture of rhythm.
These two styles are similar in that they both originated from African cultures, and they're also alike in the way in which the movement lends itself to being grounded. Within jazz, that grounded nature comes from the knees being bent as well as the torso leaning forward. So the weight is forward on the balls of the feet in the African stomp position, as you can see here. Within capoeira, being grounded is not just about being low for aesthetics. If you're inside the roda, playing capoeira, and someone attempts to kick you, how will you react? You have to get closer to the floor to escape, out of the way, also known as esquiva. The ginga is a fundamental footwork move in capoeira that allows the player to sweep and prance from side to side to the rhythm of the orchestra. Things that make a ginga have better flow are bending the knees and staying connected with both feet on the floor. This ensures you can't get tripped up if you lean too far back, because someone could just swipe your foot. Things that Maestro Ponciano told me in order to give my ginga more flavor is that firstly, my ginga will grow with me, practicing facing a wall and jinging against my shadow to be able to keep my head still while my body flows freely.
Here's a capoeira video from about a month after we started. Now, in all honesty, my ginga here isn't bad, but I do think it is quite stiff. And one thing I really like with my ginga is this sort of snake-like style, weaving side to side, and the sort of unpredictability that can come from that. So the person that I'm playing with doesn't know what's going to happen next. In this ginga, I'm quite stiff and a little bit robotic. Whereas in this next video, you can see how I've loosened up while playing and act more like a snake, a little bit more unpredictable. Maestro Ponciano, would always say that good capoeiristas always seem a little bit drunk and weightless as they're on their feet. And I really try to embody that. So here's an example of me playing in the last couple of weeks of our lessons after 2 terms. As I mentioned before, I really like floor work, and thanks to capoeira and jazz, I feel like I have a new appreciation for the floor. When it comes to improvising, I like to use elements from the capoeira game to transition from move to move. As well as that, I now feel more comfortable putting pressure on my hands, as well as inverting, more than I did before. Something I really struggle with is handstands in general, but capoeira gave me the freedom to not just see it as a still movement, but a passage through to connect two movements. I've also found jazz turns as an inspiration because when I improvise, I love to do turns. I find that using jazz turns as an inspiration helps me lead with other parts of the body, because in jazz turns, you lead with the leg, as opposed to in ballet, where it's one structure that's being turned around an axis. One thing I really appreciate about jazz is the ability to be connected to the floor without having to be on the floor. For example, I can be just as connected and grounded doing the Charleston as I can in a floorwork phrase. And I think not having to be on the floor yet still be connected is really powerful to be able to make myself a more well-rounded dancer. I also found that jazz helped me with the groove-based styles that we revisited with Vicky this term, making sure to stay rooted. This is mainly because hip-hop and groove styles originated from jazz, as jazz was one of the earliest dance forms in North America. To be honest, when we were first told that we were going to do jazz, I genuinely thought that it would be closer to what I've seen in musicals. High kicks, long lines, straight legs, black leotards, bowler hats, a chorus line basically. But instead, it was this beautiful rhythmic exchange between the dancers in the room and the music. Drina would often sing out the moves to prove how deeply embedded the rhythm is within not only us, but also the music. We already knew jazz, she just had to find it in us.